and this is news and commentary from America's Heartland. You're watching Heartlander News. Hi, and welcome in to another edition of Heartlander News. I'm Chris Stigall. The New York Democrats are now looking at redistricting, and I suspect it's going to go the same way that it went for Virginia. New York Democrats announced this week that they're going to introduce a redistricting measure that could add 4 House seats to the party's delegation in 2028 after they failed to redraw voting districts earlier this year. So they're going to try it again. Meanwhile, yesterday, the Supreme Court has cleared the way for Alabama to use the congressional map that they drew up. Why is this important? Because there is a constitutional way to draw congressional boundaries and one that violates the Constitution. And the Supreme Court does not typically get involved in the way states govern their elections unless they clearly violate the Constitution. And in Louisiana's case, and now the opposition in Alabama's case, the Supreme Court felt they had to step in and say something, and they declared that the Alabama Republicans could move forward in removing the state's majority black congressional district for the midterms, handing the party a pickup opportunity in an apparent 6-3 vote. Alabama chastised a lower court for keeping its map blocked, insisting it should move ahead in the wake of the Supreme Court narrowing the Voting Rights Act. Justice's emergency order allows Republicans to do so over the objection of black voters, with a capital B, and other challengers who contended the design should be halted for an independent reason, and it was too late for the Supreme Court to intervene. The Supreme Court issued an opinion on this and said, while federal courts should not impose changes close to an election, states are free to decide for themselves whether the last-minute changes to an election are in their best interests. So again, keeping consistent here, the Supreme Court is saying, and this is just important to know for all of us, that there is a constitutional process to change the rules for your election, and states have the right to change the rules for any election they'd like. And you have to know that, and you have to know where you live. Hear me when I say this. Your state legislature, your state representatives and state senators and your governor have the right, as long as they adhere to the Constitution, to change the rules and the boundaries on elections at any point, as long as it falls within the framework of the Constitution. Here's what doesn't fall within the framework of the Constitution: drawing congressional boundaries based on race. That is not a states' rights issue. That is a violation of the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution of the United States forbids states from racial gerrymandering. So Alabama tried to do away with it, and people stepped in and said, you can't do away with it. And the Supreme Court had to step in and say, yes, actually, Alabama can and should and has the right to do away with it right now. Just like they told Louisiana they had the right to do away with it right now. So that's all good. And there's a Federalist piece, interestingly, about Missouri, who also was engaged in redrawing boundaries, versus Virginia, who engaged in redrawing boundaries and did it incorrectly. The Federalist writes it this way, and I just wanted to share it with you. For those of you who are into the rules on this and get whipped up about gerrymandering and, well, red states do it, why shouldn't blue states get to do it? Because there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. Look, am I saying gerrymandering is right or wrong? I guess we can have a philosophical debate about that later. What I'm talking about is whether it's legal and constitutional. And the answer is, it is legal and it is constitutional as long as you do it within, again, the framework of the Constitution. Now, if you don't like gerrymandering, that's for another discussion. But we know blue states for an entire decades have been rigged to favor Democrats and eliminate Republicans entirely. So now Republicans have finally gotten smart and done the same thing in their states, and Democrats are screaming and crying about it while they're losing population. Remember, that's the other key to this. Blue states are hemorrhaging population, which means red states getting redder, more populated, which means they'll get more representation, and these blue states will shrink in representation because they're losing population. Democrats have a perfect storm coming. They're not allowed to gerrymander due to race, and they're losing population. Democrats know this is bad, so they're trying their best. They tried it in New York, and the court said no. They tried it in Virginia, and the court said no. The Federalist writes it this way: what Missouri Republicans got right and Virginia Democrats got wrong in redistricting. It was a gruesome month for Democrats in the 2026 redistricting war. Virginia Democrats' effort to create a heavily Democrat-favored congressional gerrymander crashed and burned, with losses at both the Virginia Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court. Between those rulings, though, the Missouri Supreme Court slapped down an attempt to overturn a duly elected and enacted congressional map drawn up by representatives in Missouri, and that may net Republicans an additional congressional seat. Why the two are ostensibly different? Redistricting criteria are primarily set by state election law, and while Missouri Republicans followed their laws, Virginia Democrats ignored their state's constitution. It's that simple. If you want to read in more detail each case, do you want to read why at the same time Missouri was doing what Virginia was doing, why Missouri was upheld and Virginia was not? Read this Federalist piece. If this sort of thing interests you, read it so that you understand the next time somebody brings up gerrymandering and how outrageous it is. The Supreme Court clearly just favors red states and not blue states doing it. No. Blue states can, have, are, do gerrymander, but they have to adhere to the Constitution to do it. And the red states are. Speaking of red states, Florida's legislature has okayed Ron DeSantis's plan to let voters decide whether to end property taxes this year. That's huge. As if Florida hadn't already been turning red, look at what could be coming down the pike for the midterms. Florida voters will get the chance in November to make the Sunshine State the first in the nation to end property tax. The legislature voted yesterday to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot that would slash property taxes for many homeowners and eventually eliminate them completely. If the ballot measure is approved by 60% of the voters, the threshold required for constitutional amendments in Florida, residential homeowners will save thousands of dollars on their property tax bills and may well avoid paying taxes entirely. I have a friend who's retired in Florida, tells me he will save approximately, I believe he said $3,200 to $3,500 a year if his property taxes are slashed. And that's just his portion of it. He shares a property with his brother. So that would be a remarkable savings to him. Meanwhile, just one more thing, talking about ballots and ballot initiatives on individual states. There's a group called Americans for Public Trust filing a complaint with the Attorney General of Missouri, who is a stellar individual. Catherine Hanaway is her name. The ACLU Foundation allegedly has violated Missouri's Foreign Influence in Ballot Measures Act. The ACLU Foundation contributed $2 million to a ballot measure committee through, although it receives foreign donations itself. So pay attention to this. It's an important story inside Missouri. And I know those of you who live outside the state of Missouri and maybe outside the heartland, you say, well, that's kind of a, story specific to Missouri, so I'm not particularly interested. No, it actually is a big deal. Because this case, if the Attorney General is successful in fighting it, this is something that everybody in every state should be paying attention to. When things go on the ballot, amendments to your Constitution or other things go on the ballot, and you start to see ads from various outside groups saying yes or no to certain ballot initiatives or amendments or what have you, who are they? Who's funding those campaigns? Well, in Missouri's case, the ACLU Foundation is taking in foreign money. And the complainant says Missouri's law is clear. Foreign money is banned from directly or indirectly influencing ballot measure campaigns. That's pretty easy to understand. It's pretty critical to understand. And so we hope that the Attorney General in Missouri is successful in this fight. I suspect that she will be. It's worth paying close attention to. Also worth paying close attention to, the Graham Plattner, Susan Collins race in Maine. Now, our own producer of this show here at the Heartlander, Aaron Baucus, says to me before the show, he goes, Stigall, I've been thinking about this Graham Plattner. And I said, oh, you have? What do you mean? What have you been thinking about? He said, well, It seems to me, is it possible that this guy, as outrageous as we know he is, the Nazi tattoo, the women, the oversexed nature, the whole thing, he's a really bad guy. It's pretty clear. Even the Democrats can't really defend him, and yet they are. Do you think they know they have no intention of getting him across the finish line? Do you think they know that ultimately he has no shot, and that Susan Collins is really not that big a deal to them because ultimately she's kind of a squish and oftentimes will vote with them anyway? So getting rid of Susan Collins isn't really an objective. Graham Plattner's really not somebody they're interested in saving. Our producer Aaron's theory is Graham Plattner is nothing but a great big distraction so that everyone will channel all their energy on him and not talk about the likes of a James Tallarico, Beto with a Bible, or Adam Hamilton in Kansas, another Beto with a Bible. Is this a big distraction from their own failures? They want to get everybody talking about Graham Plattner. I love the theory, Aaron. I think that's sound reasoning. So Graham Plattner went to the Senate to meet with some of these Senate Democrats yesterday so that they could have a full vetting. And here's what they rolled out with after talking with the Nazi-tattooed, oversexed Graham Plattner. Chuck Schumer up first.
I met with Graham Plattner today. We're going to beat Susan Collins and take back the Senate.
Yes. So you're saying that Janet Mill is your preferred candidate. There's been rattlings that she should get back in. You're standing behind Graham Plattner, to be clear here?
We're going to beat Susan Collins and take back the Senate.
Democrats
Yes.
sticking behind Graham Plattner, is that for good credibility in attacking St. Paxton?
We're going to beat Susan Collins and take back the Senate. Any other subject you got? Any other subject? Yes, yes, you right there.
Do you believe that Janet Mill should unsuspend her campaign?
We're going to beat Susan Collins and take back the Senate. Last one.
You have not said if you're still endorsing Graham Plattner. Are you still supporting Graham Plattner?
As I said, I endorsed Graham Plattner. We're going to beat Susan Collins and take back the Senate. Thank you.
All right, Aaron. That clip is what inspired you to believe that this is all just a big distraction, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Right. And you say that why?
He'd rather just parrot that stupid response than think critically about anything else.
I think it's sound reasoning. Aaron was driven to distraction with that clip. I'll hear it. Tim Kaine was asked about it too. This is the guy that for half a second we pretended was actually going to be a vice president with Hillary Clinton, Granny Crooked Hacker. Oof, this guy. Listen to him. Spin Graham Plattner. Again, the Nazi tattoo for 12 years on his chest, Graham Plattner, the Democrats defending or trying to avoid talking about anyway.
Do you think, considering everything on the line, control of the Senate that could come down to that race in Maine, is he the right person for Democrats to put forward?
Casey, here's my thought about this. I almost never get involved in primaries outside of Virginia because I think Maine Democrats should pick their candidates, and I don't think national
but we're pretty
figures,
far down on the primary road here.
Well, yeah, there's 3 candidates on the ballot next week. And I am not going to say a word that will tilt it one way or another. Maine Democrats are going to make the decision. Once they make the decision, I may have some things to say about it. But I'm not going to say anything now because Maine Democrats need to pick who they think would be their best representative.
Do you?
I'm not going to say anything about it now. I have no comment on the Nazi tattoo. Well, there's one Democrat, anyway, for now. I don't think they'll tolerate him being a Democrat much longer. And I know they're actively trying to figure out how to railroad him in Pennsylvania politics. And that's the hooded John Fetterman, who was not afraid to step forward yesterday. He was the only Democrat who was not afraid to step forward and say, I think we could do better than the Nazi tattoo guy. Just saying.
What kind of a creeper has been on a decade on a platform like Kick and send a dozen explicit kinds of messages and who knows what else?
Would it be better for Democrats if he was not the candidate here?
All I'm saying, it's like, when I was growing up, if someone had a clear Nazi tattoo on them, you probably could conclude that there's a Nazi sympathizer. How, at some point, are you going to continue to defend that or dismiss that?
Now, I asked Fetterman how he feels about Janet Mills, who is the Democratic governor who has suspended her campaign. He talked up her candidacy. Of course, Mills has suspended her campaign, but she did make comments yesterday reminding voters that she is still on the ballot. And the person who recruited her in that race, Jake, of course, was.
Yeah. Well, I I don't know. What kind of creeper, says John Fetterman. Of course he's right. He's the only one willing to say it. Like, they can't do better than that. Fine, whatever. Democrats, you have a race. Go ahead, put somebody up against Susan Collins. But for heaven's sakes, you can't do better than Graham Plattner? And the answer may be no. Maybe they can't. Paul Krugman, formerly of the New York Times, literally employed by that place for over 20 years. So we have an actual Nazi, a guy with a 12-year Nazi tattoo on his chest. Democrats won't denounce. He continues to believe the real Nazis are those of us who supported President Trump, and of course, President Trump himself. Paul Krugman.
We need to defang Trump as much as possible and make sure that neither he nor anybody who follows in his footsteps has power after the next two elections. But beyond that, we really need to do a thorough purging of the United States. We need a demagification, and that is, I'm not going over the top by using a word that's very similar to the denazification that we pursued successfully after World War II in Germany. We need to.
Yeah. He's talking about those of us who voted for Donald Trump. We need to purge the country of those of us who are MAGA, make America great again. We need again, this goes back to my open today on today's show. We need to purge this country of people who want to make it great again, who believe that this country is special and worth preserving. Guys like Paul Krugman say we got to do something about them. Think of that messaging. That's what the Democrats are running on. Meanwhile, yesterday, President Trump, following an executive order signed by him in May related to banking, the president said bank accounts that are being used to enable illegals to defraud the United States will be shut down. Illegal immigrants and foreign fraudsters steal billions a year from the American taxpayer. As part of my administration's historic effort to end fraud and reverse mass illegal immigration, I recently signed a powerful new executive order, which will be led by the Treasury, to stop banks, credit cards, and financial institutions from being used to facilitate human smuggling, drug trafficking, illegal immigration, and the criminal cartels who orchestrate these activities. Access to our nation's financial systems must be limited to those who have a legal right to be here and who are engaged in lawful and legitimate commerce. Bank accounts being used to enable illegal immigration or to use or to store the welfare received by illegal aliens will be shut down. Funds will ultimately face impoundment and seizure so they can be returned to the taxpayers. It is not ludicrous, but profoundly dangerous that any illegal alien can simply present a blue state driver's license or Biden border document and have unrestricted access to the U.S. financial system. Now, does that sound dangerous to you? Or does that sound like prudent leadership protecting the sovereignty of the United States and the taxpayer? Doesn't sound like Nazism to me. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. It's a defense of the country and defense of you as a taxpayer. Theft of your tax dollars. Taxation, which, by the way, I'm sure many of you believe is theft unto itself by the government. But nevertheless, this is exactly the Fraud Doesn't Pay Act, something that I would love to introduce were I king or member of Congress. This not only should be clawed back, but financial institutions. Look, heaven knows when Democrats have been in charge, they have forced financial institutions into all of that stupid, those environmental rules and regs. The acronym escapes me now. It's not DEI. It was another one. Well, at any rate, it was, and I explained it here, I think not too terribly long ago. It was big investment houses leaning on lenders to say they had to insist that on down the line, any money that was distributed to companies, any transactions that were going on inside of companies had to meet green energy initiatives or DEI hiring practices and the like. Environmental social justice, that's what it was. ESG, that was the act. ESG, environmental social governance. Sorry, I knew I'd get there. Trying to remember all these. Environmental social governance, look it up. The left tried to muscle lending institutions for the longest time to insist that everyone behave properly. They were super green, that they had the proper number of brown, black, Asian, gay, trans people on their staffs, or else the lending institution couldn't do transactions with said company. I mean, that's always been the left's MO. Here, Donald Trump says financial institutions cannot do financial transactions with illegals, smuggling human beings, sex trafficking, and the like. I mean, which sounds like the decent use of executive power and which sounds like the troubling Nazi all-control move, the power move, the totalitarian move from the top. Here again, they always project and tell you who they are. In trying to define us and President Trump, they're actually telling you who they are. President Trump is deregulating and trying to protect people. The left, when they are in control, they're trying to, that's just it, control everyone from the top down. That's the way they want it. And that'll do it today from America's Heartland. Hope you'll stay close by subscribing to Heartlander News here on YouTube. And you'll be alerted every time we drop a new show. Be sure to give us a like and comments, too, if you're so inclined. We're glad to have you along. And we'll see you next time from America's Heartland here on Heartlander News.